Alright guys, welcome to the Wednesday Directions video. Note day today on the Protestant Reformation. We've been reading about it the past couple of days. Now it's time to actually talk about it a little bit more and maybe dive into a little more detail compared to what we've read. Alright, so the Protestant Reformation. Got a couple of questions here that you should be kind of answering in the back of your mind as we roll through this presentation. The first one is, how did abuses in the church spark widespread criticism? So how did the church people not following their rules lead to people being upset with them? How did this man Martin Luther challenge Catholic authority and teaching? So what did he do specifically to challenge the church? And what role did this man John Calvin play in the Reformation? All right, so the Reformation of the 16th century. Here's a little quote that kind of gives you a good example of what the church was up to and how people kind of felt about the church at this time. So we had the word the papacy. The papacy just means the church. So thus, the papacy emerged as something between an Italian city-state and European power, without forgetting at the same time the claim to be the vice-regent of Christ. The Pope often could not make up his mind whether he was the successor of Peter or of Caesar. Such vacillation had much to do with the rise and success of the Protestant Reformation. Basically, the church was getting too powerful. They were acting more as a political unit rather than a religious unit, and people were starting to recognize that. That's what he's talking about. Is he the successor of Peter, or is he Caesar? Which one is he? All right, so the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s calls for reform, unleashed forces that would shatter Christian unity. The movement is known as the Protestant Reformation. People who would join the movement for reform called themselves Protestants, for those who protested papal authority. All right, so Protestants are the original group that were calling for the reformation or the Reformation or the reform of the Catholic Church. So that's where it all started. So Protestants are just people that are very similar to Catholic, but not, right? They have a little bit of differences, so that's kind of where the schism begins. And again, Protestant is a Christian that is not Catholic, so I'm just going to underline this. So if you want to, we're going to add the Protestant to our quiz. So let's write this term down here. A Protestant, I'm just going to underline it. Boop, there we go. Is a Christian that is not Roman Catholic. So let's jot this part down here, just a little vocab action. Let's keep it moving here. So abuses in the church, so worldly affairs that Martin Luther had problem with. So we talked about the guy Martin Luther. You've read about him. Here's kind of some things that he felt was going on that were wrong. All right, so first, popes competed with Italian princes for political power. So he thought it was strange that popes were even involved in politics in the first place. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, popes fought long wars to protect the papal state against invaders. Again, why is the church worried about protecting these lands? Some clergy promoted the sale of indulgences, which basically you could pay your way into heaven, you could pay your way out of purgatory, and Martin Luther saw it as a money-grabbing opportunity. It would be like half a person's yearly wage is what the indulgence would be, but obviously everybody paid for it if you could. Okay, so Martin Luther thought that was wrong, taking people's money for something that seems in his mind that was created out of thin air to create a new revenue stream. Popes led lavish lifestyles and spent a great deal of money on the arts. We saw that with the Medici popes, right, being patrons of the arts. The church increased fees for services such as weddings and baptisms to finance worldly projects. So if you want to get married, now the price is bumped. All right, the causes of Reformation. Church corruption, obviously leading kind of the way, and people recognizing the church corruption. It was so widespread that it was tough to not notice it. So that was the first thing. The next thing is the Avignon papacy. All right, was the period from 1309 to 1378, during which 7 popes resided in Avignon, which is France. This period was one of conflict and of controversy, during which French kings held considerable sway over the papacy, and rulers across Europe felt sidelined by the new French-centric papal court. So basically, people were not upset that French royalty was really having a strong influence on what the Catholic Church was doing, their decisions. There was too much of a pope and French friendship, maybe an ally, an alliance that was basically not shunning, but really pushing out all the other leaders of Europe. All right. Conciliarism Final authority in spiritual matters resided with the Roman Church. Mersuet of Prada, defender of peace, attack papal authority, the Christian community in some of all parts. Basically, you have the bigger ones are here kind of on the bottom. Development of personal devotion, suspicious of clergy. That just becomes people itself were reading the Bible for the first time, right? The printing press. So people were reading it and coming up with their own ideas of what the Bible said for the first time. So they weren't just listening to, the church authorities, the priests. People were sitting back and coming up with their own ideas. All right. The greed of secular leaders. 1/3 of Europe, like the land of Europe, was controlled by the church, which means that they, if we're talking about the feudal system again, where land ownership is the number one, comedy. People wanted land. Land equals money. Land equals power. So if the church has 1/3 of all the land in Europe, obviously they're going to be the most powerful entity, and they are, and they were. Okay. So papal need for money. This led to the indulgences because of the overspending on the arts and other wars that were needed to be financed. So they were pretty much broke. So they started selling indulgences, which to a lot of people was a blatant money grab, and they thought that this was leading to more church corruption. So the teachings of Martin Luther, kind of his own thing. He recognizes all these problems with the church, and he comes up with his own ideas. And he basically spills them out, and then he is kind of surprised by how much support he gets and how many people think like he does at this time. All right, so here's what his teachings are and how they kind of compare to the Catholic Church. His big one is salvation is achieved through faith alone. Okay, Luther rejected church doctrine that good deeds were necessary for salvation. So he's saying as long as you believe, you don't have to do good things. You could do terrible things, but as long as you believe, you're good to go. Okay, so obviously that's going to lead to some people upset about his thoughts, especially the church, right? He thought that the Bible is the sole source of religious truth. Luther denied authorities such as church councils or the Pope. So he basically said only the Bible has the religious truth. So you don't have to go listen to a preacher, listen to a priest. The Pope, he is a man-made entity. There's nothing in the Bible that talks about the Pope. So he's kind of saying that the whole church system is created, and he's starting to say now it's created for selfish means. And that all you have to do is have faith and read the Bible, and you're good to go. All Christians have equal access to God through faith in the Bible. And he rejected the idea that the priests and church officials had any special religious powers. Okay, so he basically said the whole system it's made up by men to have power. If we want to go back to a more pure following, we just need to believe, read the Bible, and kind of make up your own personal thoughts. You don't need any church figure overseeing you. All right. Luther's ideas quickly spread in northern Germany and Scandinavia. Many clergy saw Luther's reform as the answer to church corruption. So even other members of the Catholic Church were siding with Luther at this time. German princes hoped to throw off the rule of both the Church and the Holy Roman Emperor. So the German hierarchy, the German royal families really were supportive of Luther because they were kind of really not liking the Catholic Church at the time. Germans supported Luther because of their feelings of national loyalty. Peasants hoped that Luther would support social and economic change and hopefully end the feudal system. So peasants are really on board with Luther early on. Eventually, we're going to see a crazy peasant revolt in the name of Luther. And while it's happening, Luther's like, no, this is bad. I didn't mean this, as all the German peasant class are revolting to end the feudal system. He even goes back to and says, well, he even makes another statement, basically eagering and begging German princes and kings to put down the revolt and show no mercy and smite everyone in their path. So it gets kind of interesting there with the peasant class. Luther himself, what ends up happening, we all know the story. He hammers on his 95 thesis, basically his 95 things that he thinks are wrong with the church. He nails on the church door, according to legend, right? So because of this, he's kind of seen as a heretic, someone who's a non-believer, right, or someone who's going against the church. So Luther himself gets put on trial at the Diet of Worms. So let's put that on there in our quiz. So Diet of Worms, what is it? It's Luther's kind of church, or his trial. All right, the Pope wanted Luther to retract 41 of his 95 theses. 95 theses will be on the quiz. All right, some sources say all of his theses, but most historians go with they want him to retract 41 of them. And then Luther was excommunicated, which means he was kicked out of the church. His soul was no longer allowed to go into heaven, according to Christian belief at the time. So obviously, it's a really big deal. We talk about excommunication as one of the weapons that the church uses, because this would be, if you are a deeply religious person, having your soul having no shot to go into heaven, obviously, huge blow to you. Not a good thing for yourself. And a lot of people, it was like a crushing blow. All right. So what happened to Luther here? Would Luther reject his books and the errors they contain? Luther replied, basically he's saying, blah, 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 I'm not going back on anything I said. All right, so a private conference was held to determine Luther's fate. Before a decision was reached, Luther left Worms. During his return to Wittenberg, he disappeared. The emperor issued the Edict of Worms on May, blah, blah, basically calling him an outlaw. So we're going to have the Edict of Worms on our quiz, too. All right, so he flees. When he flees, basically, they issue the Edict of Worms saying that he is an outlaw, he's a heretic, and we're going to ban all of his writing. All right, so Luther on the run. Did things change? Yes, but at a high price. We got the peasant revolt that I talked about in Germany, where the peasants tried to revolt, end the feudal system. Princes showed no mercy. Luther could not save them and abandoned them. Basically, Luther, again, writes another piece egging on the princes to continue to end the rebellion. And basically, that was more of a political thing. He knew that the princes had more stability than the peasant class, so I should side with the princes. All right, and again, it's all over Germany. I believe like 10,000 people get killed, something like that. Next up, then, we get John Calvin. Okay, the most important Protestant reformer to follow Martin Luther was John Calvin. So after Luther kind of stirs things up, John Calvin kind of takes over and becomes the next person. So John Calvin followed most of the teaching of Martin Luther. He also preached predestination, the idea that God had long ago determined who would gain salvation. So let's write this down, predestination, the idea that God had determined who was going to heaven and hell, maybe even before you were born. All right, so no good deeds. You don't even have to believe if you don't want to, right? It's already predetermined. So live your life like you normally would want to, and it's kind of up to the gods to decide if you're getting to heaven. In 1541, Calvin set up a theocracy in Geneva. A theocracy is a government run by church leaders. Let's jot that down. That'll be on the quiz. By the late 1500s, Calvinism had taken root in Germany, France, Netherlands, England, and Scotland. In several of these countries, Calvinists faced opposition and persecution from other religious groups. And that's common in history, right? Anytime a new religion's coming up or any new idea or even something different, the other religious groups are going to normally try to take you down or end it because you don't believe the same thing they believe. All right, so radical reformers. As the Reformation continued, hundreds of new Protestant sects sprang up. These sects often had ideas that were even more radical than those of Luther and Calvin. So basically, it's just going one step further than the next guy before you. All right, so some were called Anti-Baptists, who wanted to abolish private property, obviously wanted to abolish baptism. All right. Some Anti-Baptists wanted to use violence to spread up judgment or speed up the Judgment Day time clock. Most called for religious tolerance and separation of church. So you always have some radicals, and you got kind of the normal people. The Anti-Baptists today are just kind of they're the Amish. Yeah, the Amish today are the Anti-Baptists back then. They're the same. And that's where we're gonna end off for today. Tomorrow we're gonna kind of go through some more notes. And the notes are going to be on England and the church. So we're going to look at Henry VIII and, his beheading of all of his wives, right? Had 8 wives. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived, I think. So, yeah, we'll go through all of his wives tomorrow. We'll get the introduction of the Church of England, where the entire country of England separates from the Catholic Church thanks to this guy wanting to divorce his wife. So I'll leave you on that cliffhanger for tomorrow. Today, Reformation again. write down all the stuff. If you need to pause the video because I went too fast, do